This chapter of My Hero Academia, chapter 362, has to be one of the most shocking and most talked about chapters, I think, for the entire manga. I mean, the spoilers, to the leaks, to just the overall community, to the worldwide trending of My Hero Academia that happened earlier this week, really just speaks volumes about this chapter in general. And obviously, if you've clicked on this video, you probably are interested in, just overall my thoughts on the chapter, but also just, to talk about the events. And as we know from what happened, Bakugo. Now, here's the thing. When I look at this image, there's a lot to really analyze here. Obviously, Bakugo, looking at his eyes, looking at the way Horikoshi-sensei has depicted him, he looks dead. He does. Even with the emphasis of the card and the pool of the blood next to him and all that he wanted All Might to sign. We had a flashback sequence of him talking to a vestige of All Might. Everything about this chapter does point towards basically a death. Everything. Nobody can deny. If you have read manga, when it comes to deaths for characters, this is case in point. This is exactly case in point on how a death is usually handled, especially in a shonen series. The best way to really get people emotional for a potential death is give them a flashback sequence, and then the character dies, good character development, etc. And this type of moment kind of is that. And I feel like if we really take a good look at Bakugo as a character, let's go on a thread here, and let's just say this truly is the end of him. This is it, okay? Let's just say this is the final time we'll ever see him again, okay? Unless it's a flashback or Vestige Realm, whatever, This is the last time we see Bakugo, technically. If we consider that, Bakugo's character, his story, is somewhat complete. I mean, to him basically apologizing to Izuku a few arcs back, to also him working alongside of Izuku and everybody else and being properly a part of the class and really fitting in and showcasing his skill, to even making Shigaraki / All For One nervous and kind of upset within this chapter. Bakugo's character development, for the most part, is complete. The only thing that we can really say that could be expanded upon would be him being able to catch up with Izuku. Him being able to be on the same level as One For All. But the problem is that in terms of power scaling, I doubt that's ever going to be possible. It's the truth. One For All and All For One are just too powerful as quirks. That's just the way Horikoshi-sensei has written the overall power system. So regardless, it has to be something extremely, extremely OP to even be able to rival those two quirks. I mean, look at Star and Stripe and, how that quirk was. Even with how OP or strong that was, technically, All For One still came out on top. Even if it was barely, still came out on top. So the point I'm making is that the only thing that we can really say that Bakugo can get as a character at this point, if he was to live, let's say he's not dead, would be to allow him to catch up with Izuku. But I think this thematically is a good ending point for Bakugo. I think Bakugo's death being here is very potent and powerful, because it kind of rings a big message here for a few reasons. For one, I think everybody knows Bakugo is the most popular character. At least when it comes to character popularity polls that come out all the time, Bakugo always wins. He's always the number one. And it speaks volumes about how many people like his character and how we've seen every single poll, he's always reigned on top. Beating Izuku, that is the pro tag. And even Endeavor, which technically has been kind of a main central pro tag for a long time as well. So it speaks volumes about Bakugo's popularity. And the fact that Horikoshi even had the audacity, the balls, to be able to even do a chapter like this is pretty freaking interesting. Now, obviously, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. There's always a potential possibility that Bakugo lives, that this is a fake out, because, for one, next week, when it comes to chapter day, on a Sunday, there's not going to be a chapter. And the reason for that is not because Horikoshi's taking a hiatus, but just the whole magazine's on break. There's not going to be a One Piece chapter, there's not going to be a My Hero chapter, there's not going to be a Black Clover chapter, Jujutsu Kaisen, etc., etc. The whole magazine is on break. And a lot of mangaka love planning for that, adjusting their writing to be able to leave us on a major cliffhanger, and then they come back and they continue it once again. It's very possible that this was just done in such a shocking way to leave people on that crazy cliffhanger and then come back and maybe it's a fake out. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen. However, we have seen fake outs within My Hero Academia. We can talk about maybe it's Horikoshi's fault or the editor's fault that, was removed/fired. There's a lot of ways we can talk about this, but the point is he has done a fake out with Gran Torino. We all can agree, Gran Torino, at least in terms of his character, back in the war arc, he should have died. It's the truth. He honestly 100% should have died. He didn't, but he should have. And when we take a look at this, we have seen someone basically get donut holed before, and they have somewhat survived. Now, once again, I'm not saying that this is the case of that, but we gotta remember that that's a thing. But also, Eri is another character that is within the story of My Hero Academia. Eri is broken. I mean, I've talked about this a lot in manga chapter reviews. As long as she exists, as long as she's around, she kind of somewhat eliminates the threat of death or major wounds because she can reverse anything. She can literally rewind people so far back where she just destroys their DNA. So, when we look at Bakugo right here, what's to say that Eri doesn't rewind him and bring him back? There's always been theories about maybe, that's what's going to happen to All for One and One for All, that Eri might reverse, them or even Quarks itself. That's a theory within the community. So, we gotta, factor that in. It would be wrong not to factor that in terms of the way the chapter ends. However, if I'm looking at this like a chapter-by-chapter basis, if I'm just looking at this chapter and not thinking about what may or may not happen for the future, this is a very solid chapter of My Hero Academia. This is honestly one of the best chapters I have read in a very, very long time. And I think a lot of the people in the anime and manga community agree. This is a fantastic chapter. I mean, the big reason for it is Bakugo getting such a major moment and an impactful moment. I mean, the whole card scene is very powerful. And this vestige scene really makes you wonder as well. A lot of theories can come from this. To also seeing, Shigaraki freaking out about the second user. There's just so much to analyze. So I guess let's talk about the wound. So Bakugo, if you take a look at his wound, his chest has a hole in it. Okay, yes. Now, my camera might be blocking some of it. But when you look at his wound, it looks like his chest is caved in. Like something impelled his chest. Now, if we back up and we look at previous panels, and we look at this brief panel here with, Togata and all of them trying to stop Shigaraki from hitting Bakugo, Bakugo misses his shot here because they obviously intervene and kind of try to push Bakugo out of the way. But in turn, that might be the real reason why he missed his shot and he got hit. But when we take a look at this, we don't know if Shigaraki actually hit him in the chest or if it was his own heart exploding. Because if you look in the bottom right here, hopefully my camera isn't covering it, it shows a brief panel of Bakugo's heart. And you see something breaking right there. And obviously, right before that happened, we get this whole explanation of Bakugo's quirk. That, his quirk gets more of a reestablishment of what it's capable of. For instance, he can use his sweat like nitroglycerin to explode and detonate it, but because of his new ability basically kind of condensing his blast, it caused a negative effect to where his glands were now exploding out of control and damaging his body. He's literally blowing up like his sweat glands. And if we think about like his sweat glands and where they're located at on the body, they come out of the skin. Okay, we know that. They're not too deep, but they're a little bit deep. And when we think about, how he's obviously exploding probably all over his body, we could take a look at this image here. It's very possible that, yes, Shigaraki probably impelled him, because the image here is not very clear. But we could also assume it might be both. Maybe Bakugo's, quirk, the sweat glands, exploded so intensely that it might have ricocheted maybe bones or something into his heart, on top of that with Shigaraki punching him and probably impelling him. So, this is a very, like, confusing panel. We don't really know. It's not clear. But we do see that there is impalement. Like, his chest is caved in. So, it's definitely not, like, blowing up from the inside. But it could be the sweat glands, though. Because if it's on the skin, it could go inward. So, that is something to factor in. But, anyways, let's talk about the second user, since we have that here. So, Shigaraki starts talking about, the second user, and there's been a lot of theories in the community that the second user that's a part of One for All is a time traveler, or has some form of time travel, because ever since he's introduced, even I talked about it a long time ago, he looks like Bakugo. People theorize maybe he's Bakugo's ancestor, or he's Bakugo himself. I mean, time travel is definitely something that can happen. I mean, let's be honest here. We know for a fact that quirks are unique, and there can definitely be a quirk that's going to have time travel. It makes sense. Obviously, if you mess with something like that, it can make the story very tricky, complicated, and even worse in some degree. So obviously, it makes sense why maybe Horikoshi himself has never really implemented something like that. But obviously, we could maybe say that maybe the second user in some shape or form is Bakugo, or once again an ancestor or whatever, and that's been a theory in the community. And this chapter doesn't necessarily negate that theory, it actually enhances it and basically kind of points towards that direction, especially with seeing the vestige realm of All Might and, Bakugo. Now, we can kind of point this at maybe because of the movie of My Hero Academia is why this is happening. But I feel like it's probably the obvious here with what Horikoshi is doing with the second user appearing, and there's been so much mystery around him that most likely there could be some form of link there. So, it's a very interesting chapter, honestly. This chapter is incredibly sad, and I honestly, if Horikoshi really does have the balls to continue this, and this is permanent, like a permanent death, I will be shocked and amazed. Like, legitimately amazed. I would be impressed, because I'm not saying death of a character makes a good series. I think that's what people instantly assume. When an author kills off a character and makes the series good, that's not the case. The point is that sometimes, you should kill off characters, sometimes there's times you shouldn't kill off characters for stories. But in this point in time, it makes sense for a character to die. And the reason for that is because Shigaraki, as he said himself, he's like the final boss. He is, and we know My Hero Academia is ending soon. Horikoshi's already clarified that. The series is going to be ending soon. So, with us thinking about that, this is pretty much the final arc. Deaths do need to happen. The story's almost over. So, this would be a very fitting time to kill off characters, and definitely Bakugo being one of them is very impactful and will build up for the final confrontation of Izuku versus Shigaraki. Now, one thing that does need to be said, if, once again, Horikoshi goes through this and Bakugo's dead, we also need to factor in that it's very possible these other characters might just straight up die too. Wouldn't it be wild? Like, let's just say Horikoshi, when the next chapter comes out, he cuts away from this, we go to maybe back to Todoroki or whatever, what's going on with Dabi, and we don't see what's going on here, but Shigaraki kills everybody. Like, that's also very possible. Like, when Izuku arrives, everybody is freaking dead. And it plays on that trope of, like, the hero arrives late. Something like that. And maybe it can be that type of trope to where Izuku arrives late as a hero and everybody's dead because he was late. That would be fascinating if he does that type of route with the story. But one last thing I do want to talk about before I wrap up the video, though, is Tamaki and how his blast basically did nothing. It's very disappointing with how build-up of it was. Basically, it was limitless, etc., very strong. Then Shigaraki basically refutes it and says, do you really think this could have killed All Might in his prime, etc.? And he does have a point, but still, the fact that there was so much hype and build-up and that cliffhanger from the previous chapter on it, it's a little bit disappointing. Maybe there's more damage than I realize. Maybe there'll be something that really slows Shigaraki down in the future because of Tamaki's quirk. But at least from now, what it appears, it's just minor damage that isn't long-lasting once Shigaraki's starting to use his quirks once again. So we'll see. But I guess I'll wrap up this video here. Tell me your thoughts, how you felt about this chapter of My Hero Academia. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? How do you feel about the cliffhanger we got, etc.? But with that, guys, leave a like if you enjoyed the video. It helps me out a lot, helps with the algorithm. But be safe, guys. Chibi out.